Wonderful.
Okay, so I guess we'll get started. I'm going to have Mary read the legal notice for us.
Notice of public hearing of proposed ordinance establishing a citation procedure for violations of zoning regulations. Notice is hereby given that the selectmen of the town of Clinton will hold a public hearing on Wednesday, July 10th, 2013 at 6:30 p.m. at the William Stamp Andrew Memorial Town Hall, 54 East Main Street, Clinton, Connecticut, for the following purpose: to accept public comment on the proposal to enact the following ordinance. And then the ordinance is listed.
So this is actually the second hearing go around that we're having on this issue. This matter came before the Board of Selectmen. There was a hearing at Planning and Zoning, came to us. We sent it back to Planning and Zoning to make some changes. Some have been made, and we're here tonight to hear some comments from you all. So I'm just going to open it. Normally what we'll do is you'll come up, state your name and address, and if we could hear comments in favor first, and then if we can do comments against. And we'll just start from there. So does anyone have any comments in favor, or general comments? We're fine too.
More like questions,
Okay.
comments.
We have some folks here from Planning and Zoning as well. Tom's here as well, so.
Okay, yeah. Phil Seigel, 25 James Vincent Drive. Yeah, they're really not against. I just think when I read it, there were questions I have that, seemed worthy of asking. In section 4A, which is on page 2 of the copy I have, right at the top there, it says, in those instances where the ZEO deems that there is time to do so, and where the ZEO determines that a continuing violation is not causing immediate or significant harm, a written warning in the form of a notice shall be sent prior to the issue of the citation. It just seems like a lot of discretion for the ZEO as to whether he or she should send a warning, a written warning. It seems like unless there's some bona fide danger, safety hazard, or whatever, that seems like there should always be a written notice. It just seems like a lot of discretion to me. So that was one comment. Under 5, which lists the amounts of fines, just a kind of an editing thing. I think after the dollar amounts, it ought to say per day, under 5. And then,
So you're saying on each 1, 2, and 3 per day on section?
that's what the fines are, they're per day, so you might as well say it.
Right.
But I mean, the substantive comment is the discretion that the ZEO has about sending written warnings. Seems like unless there's a real severe danger of something, it should always be a written warning. Not leave it so much to his discretion as much as we have faith in him. Under 8, under the hearing procedure, I'm always leery of the politics of this kind of stuff, and I think we all know that these kinds of violations and their resultant disputes get very political and sometimes very personal. And the way it's set up here, the first selectman shall appoint, well, it does say 1 or more, but the first selectman shall appoint 1 or more citation hearing officers, and so on and so forth. I would sure like to see it be more than one person, maybe 3. I think it should be more specific and say that you should maybe appoint a 3-person panel, because you don't want to put the first selectman in the spot of being accused of, maybe picks one person and there'll be an accusation that they're biased, or whatever it is. I just think it's better to try to get it away from the politics, and you're kind of putting it all on the first selectman. But maybe if you had to appoint, and I know getting volunteers is terribly hard, but maybe if you had to have 3 people hear the case, it might be viewed as a little more fair. Or the other thing I thought of is, we do have an ethics committee, and I don't know that they're all that busy. Maybe that's a group you could assign this duty to. They're supposed to be ethical and fair people, so just a thought. And actually, that's it. I'm all for cleaning up blight, so. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, Janet, 10 River Road, Clinton, Connecticut.
I just have a couple of questions and a couple of comments, please. What is currently in force in the zoning regulations with regard to the zoning enforcement officer and his duties and responsibilities?
In terms of how
In
to
the zoning
enforce.
regs, what is currently in there?
Well, currently, this document is actually setting forth the procedure for violations and giving, I know Tom can probably speak more to, are you saying just general what his duties and obligations are? Or?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it seems like a rather lengthy, huge ordinance. I checked Westbrook's zoning regs, and they have 2 small paragraphs as opposed to all of this. So I was just wondering what was currently in the regs.
There's
There's a
nothing
whole
currently in the regs for citations.
Right.
We have to go to court to impose our fines and everything. We have
Okay.
to take it to that level. There's nothing on a local level. Westbrook doesn't have it on a local level. Near does Safe Route right at the moment.
Okay, well, it's my understanding under state statute that if you, a zoning enforcement officer, issues a cease and desist order, that person can go before the zoning board of appeals and appeal your decision.
Right, that's
And
the
if
current
that is
procedure,
not-
and that's in the
That's
actual
the
zoning
standard
regulations.
form.
There's just-
Yeah, it's standard, it is
Right.
standard, and then if it's not resolved at that point to everyone's satisfaction,
It could be
then they can
appealed.
go to court at that particular point. What precipitated the writing of this proposed ordinance?
I think really what the issue was, is what Tom just said, is that currently you need to go to court to enforce violations of the zoning regulations. And what this ordinance will do is it will give Tom some enforcement ability at the local level to not have to go to that extent. So that's my opinion, it's a way for Tom to work with these things locally so that he can work with the homeowner under the town regulation, town ordinance versus just filing that court order or that the court action where then this person has to go and, has to defend that. And I think part of it is monetary cost to the town to take those court actions. Another is to give the zoning enforcement officer a little bit more, I don't want to say teeth, but a little bit more ability to enforce our ordinance, enforce our regulations locally. I don't know if that answers your question. Mr. Rossi has the same.
Michael Rossi, I'm a representative from the Planning and Zoning Regulations Committee that actually made the corrections and re-forwarded it back to you. So I'd just like to point out, what it also gives the homeowner the chance, or the property owner the chance, to try to deal with things locally without having to incur the cost of the lawyer first and go to court. And so that there is that side, but also one of the other things is the enabling legislation from the state is relatively new. So part of the reason why you don't see this in Westbrook or in Saybrook is that we're doing it ahead of them because it wasn't allowed before.
Well, I guess I'm still a little confused because your first avenue with a cease and desist is ZBA, and that is local.
No,
That's part of the zoning
that is
regulations.
not local. Normally, a cease and desist, if the person wants to appeal it, we go local to ZBA. If not, the town, if they decide to ignore it, we don't have a choice, we go to court. On a cease and desist, there's no local opinion whatsoever. This one's in lieu of that. This one here is, you got a repeat offender that keeps doing the same thing over and over again. But, you issue the citation, they come to the local guys, they iron it out that way. Instead of us, automatically, hand the cease and desist and say, okay, you have 10 days to that, if you don't, we have to file a report.
Has there been a lot of issues in town with regard to?
We've had repeat offenders, yes.
A lot of percentage-wise, percentage?
I wouldn't say it's
15?
a huge percentage, but, it's an ongoing thing with some of them. And there's probably, I'd say maybe 20% tops of all the complaints. We'll turn back if you're.
Are we taking in favor or against for this?
Well,
one?
actually, just anything.
All right, I'm extremely leery about the scope of the ordinance. I think it gives one person a tremendous amount of leverage and power, and it's just, and it doesn't go with one person. It's there for whoever may come in the future, or it just leaves me extremely uncomfortable. It's just too, I think it's just too overstated. It's just too much.
Thank you.
Jeff Cashman, 66 River Road. Spoke to Mike Cronin, the attorney, one of the zoning attorneys over in Old Sabre today, in reference to that they had tried this process in Old Sabre. It turned out to be one of their largest nightmares. We are not first and leading in doing this. They tried it several years ago. They found it to be very frustrating. Presented more work, more grief and aggravation. Mike Cronin is the zoning attorney over on Main Street, and we talked a little bit about it today. He had really kind of thought it was quite a joke that we even try and attempt to do this. Any phone calls, he said he would love to be able to take and discuss what their process was. If anybody on the zoning board would like to talk to Mike Cronin, he would love to hear from you. I'd also like to state tonight that I'm about ready to say I really don't want to have to say. Officially, I'm going to present some documents that are here tonight that are town documents. And I really don't want to do this. I was really hoping that in this world of amicable talking to people, that some things could have been resolved. I do believe that if there was an opportunity in our situation with zoning to be able to be pulled into the zoning commission and to have an intelligent conversation as opposed to what we've had going on with Tom. First off, I think Tom is an honorable man. I think at this point we have an interpretation issue that has gone wrong, terribly wrong. And at this point, I would like to present, for the longest time, we've been trying to figure out this word, interpretation of this word, enclosure.
I'm sorry.
Hang on a second.
I'm really sorry.
Hang on, no. I have a police report that I would like to officially turn into you tonight.
Is this, are you commenting on this ordinance?
I am commenting on this
Or are you
one.
commenting on
I'm
this
leading
one?
up to the reason why I'm against this ordinance 100%. In my final comments, I would like to be able to say the reason why I feel that this is 100% unfair to people in the town's community because of the CEO's performance on another situation here in town. That when you get bullheaded and refuse to talk to people and to look at documents that are statewide documents, that we're in a position tonight to sit here and to say that there has been documents fraudulently put into my street file. I have the police reports, I have attorney's bills, I have everything here for you to look at. If you do not want those tonight, then I will gladly say that I tried my absolute best.
Okay, is this something that, is this something you're bringing up that's, I'm hearing a complaint with?
I'm here to officially say tonight as a town resident,
Okay.
I don't believe that our zoning enforcement officer is capable of taking on this task without being judge, jury, and executioner and sit here and say, I believe that of the past records of what I have for documentation, that you are going to put him in a position to where something very wrong will happen.
Okay, well, what I'm hearing you say is that you want to submit some personal documents, personally.
Town documents.
In regard to a situation that happened between you and Mr. Lane. And I would say.
That documents that at
is
this
something-
point, if you grant him more power,
Okay.
that at this point, you are making a very large decision.
I think you're making your point that you believe that maybe Tom, this is too much power for Tom. But this,
Absolutely
I
right.
believe, is something that you're gonna have to take up with, I think that's more of an employment issue, and I don't think that's really a subject of this public hearing. So I think we get your point.
I believe the Board of
I
Selectmen has
understand
had opportunities to review Tom's performance
Okay.
as a zoning
I think that
zoning enforcement
that's
officer.
employment.
We're aware of that
Jeff,
there.
you know I respect you.
I do
And I
too.
understand.
I know as an
your point.
attorney you're speaking
And
right now, I appreciate that.
And I'm not speaking as an attorney. I believe this is a performance issue that you're bringing up, that these documents would get to. I think your point that you're making has been heard, and I believe that in some way Mr. Sangle made it as well, and the woman that just spoke before you.
I believe there's other options that go for the townspeople to be able to work with our zoning enforcement officer, our zoning commission. If there was opportunities to be able to go past Tom and to go to what I believe Tom actually works for a commission at this point, and that commission actually is in the regulations is in charge of the interpretation?
Unfortunately, Jeff, the Planning and Zoning Commission and the zoning enforcement officer is actually pretty tied to state statutes and what they're allowed to do in terms of how they enforce regulations, how regulations are enacted, and what you're suggesting is probably not something that would be allowed. They would not be allowed to do it. It goes zoning enforcement
It is
officer.
in the zoning
to
regulations that the
ZBA.
interpretation belongs to the commission, not the zoning enforcement officer. It is
And
in,
at that point, it's after Tom has issued a cease and desist, and then it goes to the commission and/or the person appeals to the zoning board of appeals.
I understand.
And then if they lose, so there is a procedure in place to make sure that Tom is not the end of the line. And with this as well, I do believe that this, like you said, is for someone who has not made the attempt to correct a violation. And I think no one's trying to take away what is allowed in the regulations in terms of having the ability and availability of the ZBA, and then also to go to court. I think this is just an ability for the zoning enforcement officer, whoever it is, in our town, someone just made that point, it could be somebody else, to allow the town locally to handle situations that have come time and time again.
tonight we are reviewing the regulations as
Tonight, we're not
proposed.
reviewing the regulations,
We're
reviewing the
talking
ordinance.
about the ordinance.
Right, not the
Okay?
regulations.
We're talking about soil erosion control, signage, we're talking
No,
about.
we're not.
what?
No, we're not. We're talking about how the zoning enforcement officer can enforce, section 13, can enforce using his powers under the statutes of Connecticut to enforce the regulations we have in place now. We're not talking about specific regulations or interpretation of our regulations. We're only talking about his ability to enforce this citation. To issue citations under this ordinance.
So we're not talking about any specific ordinance
I
tonight, or
think
any
we have
specific
section 2
regulations?
has types of violations, as most ordinances will. They will give examples of things that citations may be issued for. Types of violations does not say this is the entire list. It also doesn't say that he has to issue citations for these things. So I would say, Carolyn, if you correct me if I'm wrong, this is not the venue to discuss specific sections of zoning regulations. Tom, Mike, you can chime in on that.
No, I do agree. This is specifically related to the proposed changes to current situations occurring. This is a policy going forward.
And I do not think this is the venue to discuss our regulations specifically. And we have a whole regulations committee of planning and zoning commission. And we also have other venues where those things can occur. So,
Thank you for your input.
okay. thanks.
May I just say, if it is an issue with the regulations, the place that you should bring those is to the regulations subcommittee and bring them as suggestions. We are constantly trying to improve the zoning regulations because it's a lengthy document and it is currently difficult for people to read. It's difficult for me to read, and I've been reading it for 13, 14 years. We do welcome input, particularly we welcome suggestions on things that need to be changed. I've asked people frequently for suggestions, and those things we do try to incorporate. Some people will take the track of trying to write their own regulation and submit it, and you can do that. I personally prefer that you bring it to us, because then we can work with you to draft something that does what is needed and has the correct language. Because a lot of times if somebody comes in with something that they just wrote on their own, we end up having to turn it down because the language doesn't really apply well across the town. So again, I would encourage you, if you have a problem with a specific regulation, let the regulations committee know. And again, specific suggestions are preferred.
That sounds very wonderfully said. I do appreciate that. I also wanted to remind you, as being in that chairman, that I sat in front for 2.5 hours at a zoning meeting with some specifics, and you folks refused to talk to me.
Not the zoning commission, the zoning, the regulations committee.
But you know what? The aura that goes into what people perceive is going on with the zoning thing is that there's one commission, one zoning board of appeals, and at that point, how does the actual small ignorant man sit there without major legalities and attorneys, sit there and know the difference between all of that? Really. I sat here in this room almost 18 months ago thinking that I had enough respectability to sit here and to talk to some intelligent people, and walked out of here absolutely fuming, and there was no conversation made anywhere. That's not the way that you get anything accomplished in this town. And I'm going to say, I know where you're going, and I appreciate that.
No.
And I appreciate your input. I wished I had known that over a year ago, because I would have taken the documents that I have right now, would have presented them to you, and we would have gone, wow, are you kidding me? Maybe we would all have saved ourselves an awful lot of grief and aggravation. And the sad part about it is, people have to reflect that this is a working town. People work hard in this town. People have worked hard in this town for years, and you've affected their bottom line of what it costs you folks to go home with a paycheck. I sit there and fight for my income as a self-employed person every day, and have been majorly affected by this. And I think it's sad that people can't sit there and say, can I hand to you a document that is your own zoning regulations, and you can't do that.
Well,
That opportunity allows this enforcement to be able to go judge, jury, and executioner. And I don't think that it's fair to have Tom be put in that position.
I'm going to cut you off because I think what Mr. Rossi is saying, that there's an opportunity to, number one, have an input into our regulations prior to any enforcement, prior to Tom, it's two different things, prior to Tom issuing any notices of violation or anything like that. If we want, say I want to open a business and I don't know if it's allowed, I don't understand the definition of something, I can go to the regulations committee and say, you know, can you guys tell me what this means? Or go to even to Tom. Or if you want to open a business and the regulation doesn't allow what you want, you have an ability to go to the zoning commission with an application to attempt to change that or add in your language a new regulation, or a new section of regulations to allow your business, and you ask them permission to do that. And I think what Mr. Ross is saying is that we have a couple avenues to do that, and he thinks the better way would be, if you want to do something in town, before you do it, go to regulations committee, which is very active, they meet once a month, and see if you can work that out there. Maybe they'll change it if they're like, hey, you're right, that doesn't make any sense. And then your next step is to go with your own language to the zoning commission. But that's prior to any enforcement. So I think we're talking about two different things. So,
Do we have
does that make sense?
available to the taxpayers anything that would actually say, if you wanted to open a business, here's a brochure that could be handed out, you need to maybe do this, economic development, certain hints, do we have any kind of a
There's a
formality
pretty good
like
list.
that at all, that gives an opportunity for people to be knowledgeable about different
I
things
think
in our
we're a little
town?
off track, but there is, on the website, planning and zoning does have, you know, here, do this for that, and, you know, if you want to sit and read the regulations, you can do that. But I do know, just as an aside, that there is something, maybe Chamber of Commerce is actually thinking, Mr.
I
Kravitz.
can speak to it.
Yeah, okay.
As a result of a meeting we had here, we've been meeting with the planning and zoning, has been meeting with the chamber, and we have basically drafted a handbook, so to speak, which attempts to explain the procedure. There's a flow chart for, for whatever application you need, what the process is, how long the process is likely to take, whose sign off you have to get, whether it's the health district or the fire marshal in the process, and where that sits in the process, and outlines the time frame. And with that is just a summary and reflection of what the land use office hands out when an applicant comes in and says, I want to. Sometimes the applicant doesn't know what he wants to. He's asking a very broad question. Sometimes they come in with no business plan, no site, no anything. And they ask questions that are so broad that the land use office can't answer them. A real estate person or their lawyer has to answer those questions. One of the things that we're working on with the chamber is to make a distinction between those two things. The things that are land use office questions and the things that are questions to ask your lawyer or your accountant or your real estate person. So that's in process.
You know, let's get people who haven't spoken, I'll come back to you.
Huh?
Get people who haven't spoken, and then I'll come back to you. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Vincent, 161 East Main. Is there anything in this ordinance that would allow the zoning enforcement officer to issue a fine without the specific approval for that offense to be approved for a fine by the Planning and Zoning Commission? I'll
It
say it
doesn't have to
another
go to
way.
planning zone.
I'll say it another
It doesn't have
way.
to go to planning.
He's
Excuse
the
me?
enforcement officer, he's
He
a
doesn't
police
have to
officer,
go to planning zone.
he's a law enforcement officer, and he
State
has
statutes.
delegated authority.
Tom said he has to go to planning zone. As a matter of fact, that's generally, that hardly ever happens.
What do I mean?
So, are you saying, does he have the power to do this without going to planning zone?
I'm asking, the violations are violations of regulations of
Right,
town,
which
right?
he is the ultimate interpreter of.
Okay, but the regulations in town
Yeah.
are overseen by the Planning and Zoning Commission. There's zoning
They're
regulations
drafted
there.
by the planning zone commission.
Excuse me?
They're drafted by the planning zone
Correct.
commission. And then
In
they're
other
applied
words-
by the planning zone commission.
Applied by the, right, correct,
And Tom enforces them.
correct. So, when Tom Lane sees a violation
Yeah.
of a regulation that was established and is supposed to be provided by the Planning and Zoning Commission, is there any reason why there can't be why the procedure can't be that the zoning enforcement officer comes to planning and zoning and says, I have a violation here,
Mhm.
and that the Planning and Zoning Commission agree that in fact that's a violation of the regulations and grant him the ability to issue the fine?
You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but first of all, Tom does give a ZEO report at every planning and zoning regular meeting
Yes.
that I know of. The planning and zoning commission's job is not to tell Tom to do his job. It's Tom's job to report to planning and zoning. Correct me if I'm wrong, you guys aren't the enforcement body. Tom is the state's delegate to enforce the regulations that the town has drafted. So to tell Tom to go to planning and zoning and have planning and zoning determine whether or not there's a violation would be in opposition to the state statutes.
Is there anything that would prevent it? Is there anything
Well,
that would
there's
prevent
a
the
stopgap, yes. There's a cease and desist. If the person disagrees, then we have the zoning board of appeals, which it's their job to determine whether or not Tom has correctly interpreted the regulations and issued cease and desist.
Yes, but that's after the fact, after the fine.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying is that it should be planning and zoning first, and then there should be a determination there before there's a citation issued.
Well, what I'm saying is already the zoning enforcement officer is required to provide reports to the
I don't
planning.
think he's required to do that. Are you required to do that on everything?
Yes, I'm
You
sorry?
They ask.
They ask.
Well, they
It's
ask.
Well, that's
not
what I'm saying.
required.
I'm saying it's already part of the procedure.
Yeah.
He does it every month. I've been to planning and zoning meetings.
Yeah.
What would be wrong with including in that report any proposed violations that he intends to, where he intends to issue a fine, so that the Planning and Zoning Commission, who has established these regulations and is supposed to establish new regulations like this one, what is wrong with them offering their own input into whether or not the regulation is being interpreted correctly by one individual? I think that most of the complaints that I'm hearing here tonight are that one individual is going to be given the exclusive authority to issue a fine, and then the other side of it is that the first selectman, who by the way on record has stated he's a dictator at a public,
Then,
don't wave
you know
your
what?
hand
Listen,
because
let me tell you something.
no,
right
no,
now.
let me tell you something.
No.
I'm speaking point of order, okay? And what I'm saying is accurate. If you're going to tell me it's not
I'm not
accurate,
telling you it's accurate, but
Okay.
I'm going to say to you right now, before you say another word, and this is something we've talked about. Carol can stop me if I'm wrong. Let's not do the personal attacks anymore.
Not
Say what you
personal
want to
attack.
say, and let's not.
personal attack, I'm stating a fact just as the first selectman did. I'm repeating what he said.
And Mr. Sengel made the point in which we have the minutes that maybe it would make more sense so that it's not a political thing, that he's not, or whoever's sitting in that office is not the person, that there's three folks. that
Correct,
sit on
and
that
I'd also
committee.
like, the rest of my statement was going to be, that I think that Mr. Sengel made an excellent suggestion that you already have an ethics commission, which basically,
I don't think that can be done.
excuse me?
I don't think that
they would
could
be
be done.
overstepping their,
That's not.
Sure, what I'm saying is they're already authorized.
it's
I
not
don't
a
think
question
they
of
are.
Not for
ethics, though.
this,
It's a
we're
question
not
of
authorized for this
zoning
yet.
regulations versus compliance with those regulations. It's not an ethical
I'm not
issue.
saying it's an ethical issue.
Then
What I'm
why would
saying
the Board
is
of Ethics
this,
be involved?
the Board of Ethics was established by the Board of Selectmen. Okay? Now you need a body to serve this purpose, which to me is, you've already got a body established. Rather than have the Board of Selectmen appoint one person, grant all that authority to the first selectman, okay? You've already got a body, a group of people. If not them, then you're going to have to, or you should establish another committee as opposed to
Well,
one
we heard
person.
that. Yeah.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you. That's all I'm saying. I think it's an excellent idea. Thank you.
I just think that the thought of bringing in an ethics commission blurs the lines. I mean, the point of the ZEO is you have a regulation. If someone is not in compliance with that regulation, then then the ZEO steps in. I think if you're going to blur the lines between whether it's right or wrong versus whether it's correct or not, then you open up a can of worms. I think that the fact that the ZEO is fully aware and informed of regulations and how they stand. I understand what you're saying, that you think it's a tremendous amount of power, but there are avenues to disagree with his conclusions, and there are various methods of dealing with a situation that he's unveiled. So I don't think that this is black and white. I understand that you think that one person has an awful lot of power here, but he answers to a commission and to committees. And I think that at the end of the day, there is recourse if there's a disagreement with how he has interpreted the law.
Mr. Dondero has to talk to.
I haven't read the ordinance thoroughly, but I'm hearing this, creating another body. As I understand it, if right now, if there's a discrepancy, someone disagrees with the zoning officers, not the finding before the finding, a violation, they can bring that citation, they can bring that to the zoning board of appeals.
There's
Who understands the zoning regulations? Isn't it, don't we have that right now? And before this fine is issued, that person should be able to go to the zoning board of appeals, and they review the violation, decide whether or not in fact it's a valid violation, and then it should go to the board of selectmen for the finding. I mean, don't you have sounds like you have an intermediary board right now, having the selectmen pick 3 people, or 1 people, or 2 people, whatever it is, to decide what the fine should be. To do that, they have to understand the zoning regulations thoroughly. Otherwise, how are they making the decision? You can't just pick 3 people or 2 people out of the air and have them be able to make a decision on how bad the violation is, or how severe the violation is, and what the fine should be. You have to have some zoning knowledge, I think. So whether it's the zoning board of appeals, if it's just a group, I don't think the ethics group is the one. Now, they don't necessarily understand the zoning regulations. It needs to be a group that understands the zoning regulations and to make this decision on the fine, I think.
You know, I think we're kind of losing sight of the point of this public hearing, and that is to take input and then come back with conclusions regarding your input and your opinions. And obviously, there are strong opinions here because you're the people who care enough to come to this. So what I'm doing is making notes on your questions and comments, and the Board of Selectmen will discuss this and conclude how this will appear at the end of the day. I mean, and I understand what you're saying, and these are very, you know, I appreciate your points. We can't say yes or no, or good or bad, or anything at this point, but our point here is to collect the ideas.
I'm not looking for yes or no,
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
thinking about
But
this
I'm-
from a
I hope
practical
you're not
standpoint.
expecting too much
No, I'm
from,
not asking.
yeah.
And thanks, Carol, because I didn't say that at the beginning of
I'm just
opening
hearing,
this
I'm
meeting.
listening to what I'm hearing here, and I'm saying, you know, what is common sense?
Mhm.
What comes to the surface here? And to me, it's that you have whoever does this, and it seems like you have an avenue with the zoning board of appeals, but if that's not, I don't know how that operates right now, really. But again, whoever sets the fine, since it's not just the first selectman, they need to understand what the violation is, that's all.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what you do is you go to the Board of Appeals if you're questioning the interpretation of the portion of the regulations which you're fined for violating. And that's where you question whether the interpretation of the regulations are correct, period. The issue of arbitrary or capricious action in the administration of law is another issue. It's an issue that really doesn't affect, it's not an ethics issue, it's a performance evaluation issue. And I presume that the town has a process for evaluating all its employees, which should cover issues like that. Complaints is one of the things, complaints about the arbitrary or capricious use of authority. That would be a situation where that that's a personnel review matter. You gotta separate those things out. And there are statutory limits on the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we are not the enforcement person. The ZEO, that's his delegated response. Statutory, it's not our regulations, it's in the state statute.
Let me get Phil first, because I have to put him off already.
Oh, well, I think we could be confusing something here as far as the ZBA goes. I mean, I think a lot of the things that go to them don't have to do with a citation and
Oh, yeah, right.
fines, right? Somebody submits a plan to the land use office and said, I want to put this garage within 5 feet of my property line. They say, no, it violates the zone you're in, and then they go to ZBA and try their case and try to get a variance. So it's got nothing to do with this, citation and fining process. As far as the ethics committee, I didn't want to get all hung up over that. It just occurred to me, there's a group of people. My whole point was get it away from the first selectman, because I don't know, I'm sure the first selectman, whoever it is, doesn't want to be involved in this. And get it out of that. I mean, that's, you're a political board, and that's not a criticism, it's a fact of life. And the first selectman is our chief, he's our leader, our CEO, and our chief politician. So I just think there needs to be at least, I would say, a 3-member panel. And I, of course, agree with Mr. Dondero here that, you should find people that have some knowledge of zoning. But just to do a 3-person panel. The other thing that occurred to me is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ordinance should state that the citation process is not retroactive, right? You can't go back to
No, it's
preordained.
No.
So I mean, maybe you should just say it, that's all. I like
I
things
think
to be
clear.
clear.
If it doesn't say it, then it's not. If you leave it
Oh,
out,
if
it's
it
not.
doesn't
You
say,
would have to
okay.
specifically say it was retroactive. Mr. Carr?
I'd just like to clarify a couple of things. People who spoke in favor of this, I think, at the last hearing, were talking about blight. We already have a blight ordinance. It's under the Board of Selectmen, and there are fines that are attached to blight. It has nothing to do with planning and zoning. It's completely a Board of Selectmen. And if you want to appeal a blight citation, you go to the Board of Selectmen, not to the Zoning Board of Appeals. This is an ordinance for zoning violations, and this is under planning and zoning. Currently, if somebody has a zoning violation of any kind the ZEO has the authority to issue them a cease and desist, and this would not allow him to issue something else, which would be a ticket or a fine or a violation that carries a fine. And I voted in favor of this. I'm an alternate on the zoning commission, and the first time this came through, I voted in favor of it because I thought it would save us money, you know, without an attorney getting involved, and it would save, I think, the violator money without having to hire an attorney. And right now, they can go to the zoning board of appeals if they get a violation. Very few people do appeal it, if I'm not mistaken. I see very few appeals of the zoning enforcement officer's notices. Am I correct in that? Okay. So I mean, and you know, the reason, just for your you know situation, when you came to planning and zoning, you were in litigation, so we couldn't talk to you. That was the problem that evening, and I know you were esteemed, and maybe the expectations weren't managed properly. But once the citation has been, they've gone to the point, and by the way, the zoning enforcement officer he refers it to the attorneys. He doesn't get permission from planning and zoning to do that. He has 48 hours to report that he's done that. So planning and zoning doesn't approve or disapprove somebody being sued, just so you know that. But those are the clarifications. One of the things that I would be interested in knowing, and by the way, I didn't the second time around, I abstained, I was seated and I abstained on the second time. Because I really, after listening to the public hearing, I think it's unfortunate we didn't have the public hearings before we sent it to the Board of Selectmen. I'm not sure that this order is good. I think it would be good to have a public hearing of something like this before we send it to the Board of Selectmen. But one of the things that people were concerned about were malicious, anonymous complaints. And in the blight ordinance, it says that the complaint must be signed, must be identified. There's nothing in the zoning regulations, under enforcement, or anything in this ordinance that requires a complaint to be identified. The form for a complaint has a name for somebody, but it isn't required in a place. I'm just wondering, do we now follow up anonymous complaints?
We do follow them up, you know, if they have some substantiated thing, you know, if it's something that impairs the welfare of the community or something, we'll go and look at them. It depends on what they are. We're very limited, you know, in access to property without a complaint.
So what would
You have to do it from like a street view or public property, something like that, without a complaint.
Right, but I mean, if somebody gives you an anonymous complaint, will you follow up on an anonymous complaint?
I normally will if it's something that I can easily look at.
Right, well, that was, I think, the concern that was voiced last time, was that people were afraid of malicious complaints, and it is in the blight ordinance. So, you know, we do require it in the blight ordinance, we don't require it in this ordinance. So I think that might be something that might bring some comfort to people, that complaints need to be, people need to identify themselves.
But enforcement isn't initiated. Enforcement of the zoning ordinance is not initiated by a complainant. It can be,
Right.
but it isn't required.
Right.
The blight ordinance requires that it be initiated by a complaint.
Right.
That's very different.
Right, our rules say by complaint or observation or knowledge. That's what but I guess what I'm saying, what people said they were concerned about at the last meeting were anonymous, malicious complaints that were brought not because they were trying to enforce the zoning laws. They were trying to you know, inflict something on somebody. And I think if there is a complaint, it would be good policy to require the identity of that person. That's all. That's my suggestion.
This has really been a really good, healthy conversation. There's brought a lot of intelligent input to it, and I wanted to be able to say that. I learned an awful lot here tonight. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't want Tom Lane to do his job. As an example, across the street from the hardware store is a small little tiny building that is not inhabited, and the grass gets way out of control. Every year it belongs to a bank. There are times that you have to make phone calls to people to try and get the grass to grow, because we all have businesses out on Route 1. Okay, the blight ordinance, the grass issue, and like that there. I think technically what really should happen at this point, I'm not against the cash. against Tom doing his job, I'm against the idea of people being penalized with a cash fine. Sometimes we sit here and sometimes when it hits your pocketbook, you get people to move a little bit, okay? What bothers me is, on some of this, is that maybe what we need to do is we need to separate some of the regulations, we need to move a few things aside and insert it. There is a normal standard policy that Tom goes out and he gives a notice of discontinue or gets a notice of violation, and when it's totally ignored or there's no means of communications to the zoning enforcement officer coming back or anything like that there, I can see when you say numerous violators or, you know, you've got the same problem again this year with the same grass that grows with the same people all the time that are not taking care of their properties. I can understand that. I think what needs to happen at this point is that people need to know that, A, there's a charitable form that starts where maybe people have an ignorance that they just don't know that they're in violation of something.
That's why all of the
Okay.
time frames.
And it's not always just a cash fine, offensive of a sign or offensive of an A-frame sign or Sal Marcos flashing sign, and you walk in and you say, okay, well, you know, you need to get a different sign that's not flashing because we don't allow that. And immediately these people turn around and they get another sign and they don't want an argument with Tom, they want to work with Tom. Most people do want to work with Tom. That's why Tom's success rate, as he's saying, is about 80% or whatever. I took that part of it tonight. I think people, the goodness of people, want to be able to take those problems that are out there that were sitting there, and they want to justify or they want to rectify within their means of what that they can do financially. We are in a tough economy, and to be able to come up with thousands of dollars for an attorney, thousands of dollars worth of repairs, or thousands of dollars worth of whatever, I do believe people really do try. They try to make it neighborly. They try to take on their projects as best that they can. And in a struggling economy, as businesses are struggling and small businesses are trying to start out, and we're trying to fill some of the storefronts, we want to make it as easy as we can for people to come in to do business in town. Okay? I think Tom's stuck in a tough situation where he's sitting there going, but you know, I've said it 1,000 times, you just haven't mowed the lawn. How many times do I have to tell you, year after year after year? Maybe if I hit your pocketbook to a bank who owns a piece of property, maybe you'll start paying to have the thing maintained. So I think to take the regulations as they are, maybe kind of like what you do on your computer, you kind of step it aside and insert it in a certain place to say that that cash fine is now, instead of eliminating, I think is proper and it's fair to both parties. It's fair to Tom to say, okay, I've given you 30 days to do this, or I've given you 40 days to do this. The next time I come out, I have to hit you with a cash fine, and I'm really sorry, but you're ignoring everything that I'm trying to tell you. Maybe that's a proper way of doing it so it's not offensive to a homeowner or to a business that's sitting there trying to figure out what to do in a seasonal period or the marinas or whatever what happens to be their season of business. Sometimes it's hard to be able to address an issue at that moment with 10 or 15 days notification by the time you hire contractors or somebody to do something. It's almost impossible sometimes to get something done. I think the heart of most people in the town of Clinton want to work together with the P&Z, they want to work with the zoning department, and they want to be able to have respectability one way or another. And I'm asking, maybe that would be the formal way of just being able to say there was some goodness in the beginning. Unfortunately, the next step is for me to have to catch with a cash fine. I'm really sorry, but that's the way it is. Maybe that's a good way to be able to do that. It eliminates the issue of confrontation to somebody who's now taking that cash fine of $50 or $100 or a couple $100 and taking money from groceries out of people's mouths and putting it on their tables. That could be very offensive on both sides, and I can say that, and that's all I'm going to say.
Somebody else? Dan?
Realizing that Alan is here as vice chair of planning and zoning, and I guess Tom just left the room for a minute. I just wanted to see if either would have any issue or if they thought it was a good idea that as a part of the zoning enforcement officer's report each month, that he let the Planning and Zoning Commission just know that he intends to fine a particular property owner. And not tell him whether to or not, simply provide input into that.
Mike, you're
Well, particularly because of stuff that Kirk's done, we do now have very complete reports from Tom explaining exactly what he has done. And it has the dates, it has the types of violations, when the first warning was sent, when the when that then proceeded on to cease and desist, all of that's in there, and that would continue with this ordinance, I am certain. But it would say, okay, I gave the warning on day X, 30 days later, it's the fine. And that's the way this is written. It says, except for those cases where it's a danger, the warning is expected. And the way that the enforcement has proceeded, if you go back through years of these documents, you will see that Tom has given warnings I can think of one case where he had to act quickly and did not do a warning. And that was a fireworks store that opened up right before the 4th of July. And by the time anything would have happened, they would have been out of there. Okay, that was the only case, okay, in like 13 years there, that he did not give a warning. Okay? And this does not preclude that warning. It does, in fact, it puts it right in print that it should be given unless there's an imminent danger or threat to the community. Okay, and so I don't think that that's an issue. And I respect Tom, for giving us all that information, and I would expect that he will continue to give us that information.
And Mike, it doesn't even say that it should be given, it says it shall be given unless there's an immediate threat. So it's
Right.
not even.
Right. I'm sorry, the language was even stricter.
Sorry.
Yeah. That's the lawyer in you. Say, I knew.
I can't.
Excuse me, I understand everything about the warning, but the question I'm asking is, would there be anything wrong in town? I'm just asking you, as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission, if before a fine is issued, just the report before, to just include that if this property owner fails to comply, I intend to fine them.
That's,
Is that okay?
that's implicit in the law, in the regulations. The regulations say that. It lays out a specific procedure.
I understand, Alan, but wouldn't it be better, is there anything wrong with it being in the minutes that I intend to fine this property owner if, in fact, they don't comply before the
But
next
it's
meeting?
implicit, because if he tells us that he served a violation notice, the process is laid out. When we look at that, we say, if that person doesn't cure that violation in 30 days, they're gonna get issued a violation notice under this, or they can go to court against them under the other one. The law doesn't fundamentally change. What we're changing is the locus of administration. Are we gonna enforce this locally to some extent, or are we gonna make it something that is taken to court? That's where the difference comes in here. That's fundamentally the change that's being proposed.
Anybody else?
I think it's also important to say that the blight ordinance has not prevented us from going to court. I mean, I guess we find somebody and then we've had to go to court to get it condemned and to do some other stuff. But the idea is to reduce the amount of going to court. It won't eliminate it.
It also doesn't eliminate your ability to go to Superior Court to appeal.
Correct.
So that's never taken away. It never stops locally.
So excuse me, but I would just like to, if you don't mind, do you think it would be a good idea, or would you have any issue with the preceding meeting, before you plan to issue a fine, just put it on record and tell the Planning and Zoning Commission that this is what you intend to do if they don't comply? Do you think it would be a good idea?
It could be time consuming. Depending on when, let's say, it could be like a 2-month affair, it turns into 3 months before you actually did anything. So by that time, I'd probably be in the other scenario, handing out the thing, so it would be kind of unworkable. Because commission meets once a month.
Right.
Violation happened the day after the meeting, therefore they're not going to know about it for 30 days.
Right.
Then I notice that, and I'll have to go to them, give the warning to them, saying that. State statute says I have 10 days to give, the notice. You usually give them 10 days, you wait, a little bit longer, we're working with you, you wait even longer. But statutorily says there's a 10-day frame they have to answer, give them a time period. If If they don't answer it, you issue them another one, which is cease and desist. That gives them 10 days to comply or appeal. If they don't appeal it or don't comply, then it's automatically the court, we're spending big bucks. And that time frame is gonna come into play before the citations we get if you went to the commissions every time.
So 20 days could have already taken place between.
Yeah,
one
you've
meeting to
already
the
gone
next.
past the statutory timeframes. That's what would happen in that case. It's a kind of a tough thing to do, you know, because it's a monthly meeting. If it was a weekly thing, it said yes, you might be able to make that work.
So at this meeting before the 20 days, would you explain to the Planning and Zoning Commission that you intend to file this and then this, and then if that's not followed, then you intend to issue a fine? I understand now that that's vague.
It's spelled right out in there how to do it.
I understand.
Basically, you're asking if I'm gonna tell it,
Just
give
make
a
that
warning
another-
notice to everybody, they're gonna get a warning. They're actually gonna get 2 warnings. They're gonna get a warning saying they have a violation, which is, you know,
Then
kind of like the
it's-
nice thing, it's
I
a
think
notice
the
of
point has
violation.
been made that the point has been made that there's a comment that planning and zoning should somehow be involved, or at least Tom should be reporting to planning and zoning. So I think that will come back to our meeting, we'll talk about it. I think we get the point. You know, Tom obviously has time constraint issues, we have statutory issues, we have how do we decide who's going to be discussing planning and zoning, and who's not. We'll talk about it at our meeting, but I think we get the point. Anyone else?
I have a question about your public hearing procedure. No, seriously, does the Board of Selectmen, do you have to have a meeting to have a hearing? Do you have to have a quorum?
We voted to go to public hearing at our Board of Selectmen meeting.
Well,
don't
I
believe
understand
we need a quorum.
that.
I don't believe, we don't need a quorum for public hearing.
I'm just curious.
If it doesn't being passed, we would need a
We're
quorum.
not taking any votes, we're
You
just
left it
listening to
right.
public comment.
Just take-
We're not taking any action, we're just opening a meeting and closing it. Yeah, it's a good question.
It's a different rule,
It would
because
probably been
boards and
something-
commissions
yeah.
have different rules that apply to them.
Right, but we're not taking any action.
Well, planning and zoning. would have to
We,
have-
we don't take action either.
yeah,
At a
planning-
public hearing.
Without a,
At a public hearing, yeah.
Be specific, Alan.
Just a question,
Alan, that's a great question. Probably one we should have brought up before we said, I call this meeting to order. Anybody else?
May I please ask who authored the ordinance?
The Planning and Zoning Commission, I don't know if you guys had a committee together, right?
Yeah,
And then it went to the full commission.
it was authored through the Regulations Committee with help from the Land Use Office. And the attorneys, yes. We did run this through the P&Z attorney and made sure that.
And then it came once to Board of Selectmen, we did have a public hearing, we took comment, we sent it back to planning and zoning, they sent it back to us with changes.
Right,
And
there
now
was
here-
one, I wish I could remember which one, there was one change that was asked for that we could not make because it was in violation of the state
Right.
statute.
Yeah, I don't remember which one it was.
And I
Good time,
think
30
we
days,
forgot which
30-day
one it was.
timeframe requirement.
I think Alan's there was the timeframe.
Okay. But that was the only, it was because we had to follow state statute, we couldn't make that change. The other changes that were requested, we
Wow.
incorporated those and put those in. So we did listen as much as we could, as much as we were legally allowed.
Right. So we have, we meet again next Wednesday, so Carol and I will take the comments that we heard tonight back to a Board of Selectmen meeting and discuss them. And if we feel that any of these things should be incorporated, changed, deleted in the ordinance, then we'll send those comments back to planning and zoning, and if they make any changes, we'll do this again.
Will you include that people here, I think universally feel that it should be at least a panel of 3, if not 1?
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about it.
Hearing.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about everything that's brought up tonight. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well then I will close our public hearing. And I guess Mike will be in contact.